Marlowe, tell me what it's like living with Greg and Jen and the kids. Is it really nice? Because this seems like a really nice place, really nice home. You seem like you really like it here, yes? How was your walk today? Interview with the Rucka family. Marlowe. Hi.
Let's raise the cameras.
Yes, I know. Greg Rucka, oh my goodness, thank you so much for joining me on Culture Chat.
I'm very happy to.
Yes, first of all, obviously you hear this all the time, but I'm a huge fan and I have so many questions, but you have just graciously invited me not just to interview you, but into your home, and for me that is just
yes,
like
the glory of our front room.
Yeah. That is such a kind gesture, and I really appreciate it, because I know that especially you creators, especially right now with everything with you, time is of the essence. Like, you have such limited time, so the fact that you take time to speak with me.
It is busy right now. But,
just a little bit.
But we've been working for this, working to this, I should say, for a while.
Yes, yes. So when I first started reading Lazarus, and I think I told you a little bit about my backstory, you actually motivated me to become more of an activist, and actually, instead of just grumble about the things that upset me in the world, I was, calling my congressperson. I signed up to all the things that you recommended, and in part, one of the reasons I am actually sitting here with you now doing this podcast is because I wanted to kind of have another voice and something to help, bring about more empathy, because I share a lot of other stories on this podcast. It's called Culture Chat. I share a lot of, immigrant stories, LGBTQ stories. I just try to, show that we all are human and we all have connection. And so, in fact, this is actually your fault that I'm here in your house today.
Okay,
so
good.
thank you.
So now you know who to blame. Right.
Yes, so thank you. But, let's talk a little about your work. Like, you often push readers to think, heaven forbid, especially about current events that are going on.
Yeah.
Obviously with your most recent work of Lois Lane, which was very exciting for me to get a hold of. And maybe it shouldn't have been comical, because it's like a little bit dark that it's comical, like too close to home.
The timing on that first issue was remarkable when you think that issue was written 6 months before it came out. And then to have the White House once again, going on about the internment camps and just the smoldering dumpster fire that is a White House press conference these days.
Yeah, it was almost like it was,
Yeah, it was like I'd written that.
It was a written that. Yeah, it was very ironic, but
But see, the one thing that you can rely upon right now consistently, like seriously, the thing you can rely upon is that you will wake up and U.S. politics will have found another level to descend to.
No bottom.
Yeah. There isn't. There really isn't. It came up at the show because we did Rose City this weekend.
Yes.
And it's that apocryphal experiment about you put the frog in the pan and you slowly heat the water and the frog will allow itself to be boiled and it turns out that's not true.
Okay.
Like, the frog will eventually go like, this is really damn hot, and get out. Human beings don't do that. We're in boiling water right now. We're going, it's
normalizing. We're normalizing.
Absolutely. And it's that meme, everything's fine.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. And no. And if you think about what things looked like 4 years ago, it didn't look anything like this. Didn't look anything like this. So, actually, I don't even know what I mean. I just know that I've been thinking about it, and it's frustrating and it's depressing. I was looking at the Washington Post this morning, new Kavanaugh allegations that the FBI knew about last fall. It's like, okay, great. So every single institution right now seems to be failing us on some profound level. No wonder people don't have faith in the institutions.
Yeah.
So, but what is the alternative, right? No institutions, really?
Yeah,
Do
I
you,
know.
do you
It's
not want the fire department to come when your house is on fire? I mean, really, that's
yeah, I know,
that's
and that's the problem. It's like, well, we're supposedly in a democracy. That we're supposed to have democracy, and it's not the best system. I mean, it's
Oh,
not.
no,
It's
it's-
broken and
it
everything,
is.
but it's one. I mean, what are the
Find me
alternatives?
better,
But
right?
yeah, it's what are
That's exactly
what are
it.
the
It's like
alternatives?
it ain't perfect. Find me better.
Yes, yeah. So that's the thing,
And it's significant that the failure of the system right now is the result of a targeted attack on it, right? It isn't that the system itself was inherently open to the attack, right? But uh, the system did not. How to put this? It took effort to get us here.
Oh yeah.
All right,
Sure.
and a lot of it was negligent effort. I'll even grant, in some cases, people that I would normally ascribe as intentionally bad actors engaged in behavior that they did not see the consequences of. I think the GOP is a shining example of that. I think that, in playing the short game and in playing the long game, they didn't realize what they were iterating. It's going to be very interesting if an impeachment, if the vote does come to the floor, because I've seen more than one representative say, well, you know what, if they're going to vote against it, every single one of them needs to be on record saying, I do not think he has committed impeachable offenses. And I think that's important. But it's also, like I said, I mean, I think it's important to remember, we hit a perfect storm of weapons that could be used against the system. And some of them were created or unsheathed without any intent for this. And then people came in and said, I can use this to a very negative end. I can use this to get a specific result. And some of it absolutely is part of the system. Because the democracy itself is not the flawed system. The capitalism, the end stage capitalism we are in, is one of the most lethal things to it. And it's interesting because I remember seeing Ava DuVernay put on Instagram around the election, and I think it was Plato, but it was literally a sort of infographic animation where it's either Plato or Aristotle.
One of those philosophers.
Yeah, but literally
Yeah.
describing this as this is how you destroy democracy.
Yes.
And it is directly linked to wealth.
Well, like yesterday, I remember you mentioned something about on one of the panels, somebody saying, "Well, Batman shouldn't be a hero right now
that's
as a
me.
billionaire."
That's me. That's me stealing something that Kelly Sue was saying.
Right.
Kelly Sue DeConnick. But she's right. How you can promote a multi-billionaire as a hero right now is amoral, possibly immoral, and decidedly unethical, right? We have problems right now that can be solved by literally 3 men whose names we all know taking a pay cut and still living in greater wealth and luxury than any human beings in human history could even conceive of. They got rid of half their wealth and put it back into the society. We would have solutions.
And speaking of heroes, the thing about Lois Lane that, of course, that I really loved is that Superman's there, but he's like a supporting character.
Well, it's her book.
And it's her book. Even still, though, it's like, you know that he's in some way. I think some readers might still think, well, maybe he's still going to like save the day, you know. And it's like, no, Lois is the hero of this book. And I know that when we spoke a few months ago at San Diego Comic-Con, you said, well, I don't know, people are going to, how they're going to react, you know, what story they're looking for.
I still don't know how they're going to react. I really don't. We're 3 issues in, and I've got no idea how the book is being received.
Okay.
But I can't write to, and I've never been able to write to that anyway. You know, if it turns out, that nobody's buying it, they'll cancel the book, and that'll be that. But I can't change the story I'm going to tell in the hopes that I'm going to please.
Right. Well, you're
audience.
actually not usually known for trying to please.
No.
You know, you write
but
true.
I think that. But I also think that's bad writing.
Right.
Right.
Of course.
I mean, like, if my goal is to make you happy, I'm going to lose. Right. Because either I give you everything you want, in which case you haven't earned it. Right. Or I am trying to guess what you want, in which case my story has no purpose and no heart and no soul. One always wants to respect the fandom, right? You need to respect your audience. But there is some sort of, part of the contract we've entered into is that you're going to read it, and if you like it, you will keep reading it, and I will give you my best work. And if you don't like it, you won't read it. And that's your vote. That's how you say, not for me. And if a lot of people go, not for me, then, then capitalism does what it should do, right?
Yeah.
Which is the market won't bear it.
Right. I mean, but you can't also, in any art form, try to please everyone, because then you just kind of go insane.
No, and I would actually argue that that any artist who creates something that everybody likes has somehow, there's a failure there, right? I mean, I just don't know
it's
how
like
you
a sellout, or
well, it's not
or
even that.
just...
I mean, how can I possibly, even if I wanted to?
Right.
Right, I don't know how to create something. For everybody who loves Harry Potter, there's at least, there's a handful of people who can't stand him. Right, there are people that didn't like the books. The idea that something's going to be met with universal acclaim, and it being truly universal acclaim, I would be really nervous. Everybody came to me.
We've all become the what are they called, scions. We
that means that we've kind of been programmed.
Right.
I'm pretty much off all social media these days. The only social media I'm on is Instagram. And I was looking at one of the Stumptown promos that ABC has been pushing insanely came up on my feed this morning, and I saw, at the top of the comments, and I was like, oh, this is going to suck, and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, and the normal response was like, why would you say? You can't have possibly seen it. I know you can't. It's not out yet,
Right.
But there was also the sense, and then I looked up and I saw that the post had over 1 million views. And I was like, okay, well, there's about time. Right? There's got to be at least one person who's going to say, no, I don't like it. It's not for me. For whatever reason. Now, the reasons may be valid, they may not be. But I actually took some comfort in that. And when you look at it, you go like, okay, this has over 1 million likes now. So of course, somebody's got to weigh in and be like, no, it's stupid.
You're like, bring me back to the norm. I mean, and speaking of social media, and it's something that I had written that I wanted to talk to you about, because I'm kind of that generation where I remember when it all started.
Yeah.
And then the first thing out were these forums, and they like kind of how Reddit is, I guess, now, right? Before the actual Facebook
That's
stuff
when we had
and everything.
message boards.
Yeah, message boards, right. And so for me, I'm in the Kung Fu world.
Yeah.
And my father is really a pioneer that really started Chinese Kung Fu on the East Coast. He kind of really helped bring that culture here. And so we're kind of in the martial public eye, have you, so then, I'm the daughter of this great grandmaster, and I'm doing my thing. And it was just like like my first intro to forums and media, it was just horrible. Like people who didn't know me would write all these things, and I was so turned off, and I've never been turned back on. Yeah. But I do see the use. I mean, here I am on a podcast. How am I going to get people to watch, right? And
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So now but this is a whole other problem.
Yes.
Because I'm in a position where I don't have to be on social media. And I talk to classes sometimes and other peers who maintain that they need to be on Twitter and they need to be on Facebook, and a couple of them are wildly successful. I mean, some of the most successful people in comics who maintain absolutely that they have to have this presence. And I think they're absolutely 100% wrong. I think that they are collaborating. I don't think that there's an argument to be made, and I'm talking about specific platforms now, because message boards, at least in theory, there is the ability to moderate and to police it.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
I've got a Discord server now for
Lazarus.
And the whole purpose of that server is to effectively bring back a message board format. And there are codes of conduct, and there are rules, and there are guidelines, and we enforce them.
Right, and you have a moderator, so
yes.
It's not just like, oh, everyone, let's hide behind our username and just say whatever we want.
You don't get to, you don't have to give me your real name. But if you're going to start throwing stuff that you would never say in person, you're leaving.
And that's what I think the biggest problem for me is. I'm a very direct person. If anyone's ever met my parents, a lot of my listeners know that I am cut from that same cloth where I don't understand it. I don't understand why someone would feel like they can be this other person, take on this other persona.
But that's entirely the problem, right? Because that ability to interact without any responsibility.
Yeah, no accountability.
Exactly. There's just I don't have to own anything I say. I don't have to own anything I do. And then if you just think about that metric, right? The nature of social media, again, for people who are doing things where they want the name identification. Social media does me no good professionally if I go on there as anybody else but Greg Rucka. I'm there as Greg Rucka to tell you about what I'm doing, right? So that means you know me. You know you're talking to me. And if you're going to call yourself, hates everything 8787, okay, well, then you're invisible. And you don't have to own what you say to a real person. So that's part of it. I think that, again, it goes back to this sort of end stage capitalism. These things are monetized. We are the product. Participation means that we are putting money, and literally now we're paying them to harm us. These are platforms that are designed to erode, that actively designed to erode reason, higher thought. They are designed to engage you solely on an emotional level, and the emotion that they want is anger, followed by fear. Because if they can get those two, you're going to react, you're going to click, you're not going to think about it, you're going to speak without considering what your words are. And it's going to maintain engagement.
Anger and fear. Some other people seem to love anger and fear.
The best way to control people, right? The Frank Herbert line, fear is the mind killer.
Yeah.
But it's true. And then, and then anybody who wants to argue the point, my response is, okay, go on Twitter and see how quickly they take down copyrighted content. YouTube, Facebook. They get rid of it within minutes, right? Something goes up and Disney says, we don't want that up, it's gone. It's gone. You cannot find it. It's scrubbed. But they can't get white supremacists off of Twitter. They can't get rapists off of Twitter. They can't get racists. They can't block these things. Oh, we can't police that. Facebook has the gall to say there's nothing in our code of conduct says that, you know, what has to be posted needs to be true. So it's okay to put out a viral, you know, video and to propagate it of Nancy Pelosi, quote unquote, drunk.
Right, right.
When they know it's not, there's a difference between fiction and propaganda.
Exactly. That's something I completely agree with.
So,
and that brings us back to like Lois Lane, like, and journalists in general, like that is a huge challenge that they're facing, where they're, you know, there's this other medium that never used to be there that's just constantly contradicting, and then we get the fake news term.
That's exactly it. This is
no
longer real,
right?
Because facts don't matter, investigation doesn't matter, and anything over, you know, anything that requires more than 10 seconds to read apparently isn't worthwhile. Well, the world's not simple, and the desire, you know, and the ever complicating world leads people to either try to simplify it or to disengage. And the people who are trying to simplify it then simplify it in a way that is anti-reason. That's how you get anti-vaxxers, right? That's how you get flat world. Yeah. No, you really do, because it's like, oh, well, this is a simple, easy to swallow answer. You know, some guy, wildly disproven, we know it's not true, the science is not there, says this led to autism. And we know it's not true. It's factually not true. But, wow, what a great answer.
Fear, anger.
But there's a meme or a joke running around. I hear my son pulls it out every day that, you know, the birds are spies. The birds are government spies. It's the exact same logic, right? There were birds there on 9/11. It's true. You know, it's that law. It's that. You know, correlation is not causation.
Yes.
But many people are like, correlation is causation. That's what it is. Oh, people were vaccinated, and they had autism. Yeah, you're right. That's true. You know what? You know, I'm a writer, and I wear glasses. Therefore, all writers wear glasses. Right? It's like, no. You could say, all writers therefore wear torn blue jeans. All writers therefore have earrings. All writers therefore have tattoos. All writers therefore live in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, it's just, you can keep going and going. And that's what they've done. They've kept going and going. And it's funny because a lot of this is what I wanted to talk about, because I do read all the, you know, the letters to the editor and the stuff at the end of the comic. And I was just interviewing Diana Schutz, and she was like, oh, I really miss letters to the editor, because she shared that story. That's actually how she got to be friends with Frank Miller and that camaraderie. And I particularly really enjoy your letters at the end, and I'm curious of which ones you choose, because the last one I read, basically someone called you insane, was worried about your mental health because none of your predictions about the presidency has come true, and obviously very bitter, angry person.
Michael really didn't like me answering that one. And Michael feels that we should no longer answer letters like that. But he was wrong. And look, I know when they're dog whistling me, but it's my house.
Yes. So my husband said, because he loved your answer, and he goes, "That's why you don't fuck with a writer." He's like, "You're gonna because at the end you're gonna have the last word."
That's exactly it. It's like, come inside, let me spank you.
And you did.
Yeah, and that was why we published it. It's weird because we don't get as many letters as we used to, but we tend to get a lot of letters now from repeats, like people who want to continue conversation.
To kind of get to know them.
Yeah, and dialogue.
And you're like, go to the Discord.
Yeah, and I suspect that's gonna reduce it as well. One of the fun things about the Discord is actually watching speculation.
Oh, what's gonna happen?
Yeah, and people really drilling down and talking about, you know, what's going on with 8 and this and that. And,
So do you respond to the letters that you don't publish as well?
Some of them.
Okay.
And sometimes, like way back at the
Because I
beginning.
just don't know how you would have the time. I mean,
We don't, like I say, we don't
get
get that many. If I got, if we were getting hundreds of letters for every issue, then it would be a problem. These days, it tends to be the week before that part of the book has to go to press. What I'll do is I'll sit down and I'll start working on the back matter. So I'll reach out to, I'm about to lose her name. I want to say Crystal, but I'm afraid I may have lost it. To do like the World of Lazarus bit. Eric Troutman and Richard Howe will be working on whatever the artifacts are. I'll do my reading list, right? That's normally the first thing I do because that's easy.
because it's easy, you're ready.
Yeah,
to go
I
with
just
that.
like, blah, this is what I thought. And then I'll go through the letters and I'll try to find a good spread of letters because I always get a little nervous when every letter you read in the back of a comic is, oh my God, I love your book, it's the greatest thing.
Right.
I mean, it's
because
very nice to hear.
you just said earlier that you were looking for that one that has kind of a.
And it's also like, it also feels like you're building a temple to yourself.
Tell me more.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, enough about me.
But
Tell me more about me.
it is nice, though, to get that appreciation, because I was speaking to Michael over the weekend, and he's like, well, I sit home all day and drawing, and it's nice to get out to, because I said, are you tired of the con thing? And he goes, but you know what, it's nice to get out and get the feedback, good, bad, or whatever. He enjoys it.
He does like 2 or 3 a year. And I think, this year's an outlier year for him because not only is he leaving Texas, right? Not only did he do a show in Portland, he's doing a show, in the UK.
Right.
That's crazy for him.
He's going across the ocean.
And Michael is Michael's an iconoclast and he's a curmudgeon.
But he wanted me to ask you, and I shouldn't have set that up, but why is he such a great collaborator?
We can come back to it in a second.
Yes.
But he's absolutely right. One of the reasons that you do shows is so you can get out there and you can see people, because it is in its own way. It's not nearly as toxic as social media, but it is similar in the sense that when you have a letter column, you are having a very small sample size, right? Most people are very happy to read something, enjoy it, and then and not send an email. There's no obligation to, right? So for the people who do, that was an effort. That's a thing. Why is Michael a great collaborator? Michael's a great collaborator because we test each other. He and I are very, very dissimilar in a lot of ways. We are not the same person at all. We have very different interests. We come from wildly different backgrounds. Our recreations are very different. But there's very little to no daylight between us about a lot of things that I would qualify as falling under the artistic umbrella. We want stories to do certain things, and we believe they should do certain things. We have a preference for a certain kind of execution. Obviously, our politics are very much in line. He's even more, if you can believe it, he's even more to the left than I am. And
he lives in Dallas.
Yeah, and he will fight you, right? I have a reputation for being scary and mean. I'm really not. And I'm, for the most part, conflict avoidant. I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy arguing for the sake of arguing. I never have. I grew up, my father was a workers' comp personal injury attorney. We grew up in a farming community in Central California. My dad represented, for the most part, migrant labor. So we were real popular amongst our neighbors, all of whom owned the businesses that were exploiting these workers. And my father being, not only were we middle-class educated Jews, but then my dad's an attorney. So argument, about a point was a thing that happened. And I hated it. If we could get through one dinner where we didn't have to argue about something. It was a blessing for me. I don't actually enjoy it. I don't like fighting. I will do it, and I will do it with everything I have if it comes to it. Michael, I have never seen him, and it's funny because he and I had dinner last night, and I guess he did some sort of survey or personality analysis, and he came back with being like his highest trait was adaptability. And he was like, I never would have thought that, and then I started to think about it, and he is. You can see he has an ability. He will argue devil's advocate. He will take both sides. But that isn't to say he doesn't have his convictions. And the things that he holds near and dear, oh yeah, he will draw blood. He will draw blood. So all of those things. And then the other huge factor is that, and it was funny because I had been in comics a good 6-7 years before he and I started working together. But he was the first artist who said to me, he was the first artist who would ever come back to me on a script and say, I don't think this is right, or you should look at this again, or this doesn't make sense. And it was when Brubaker and I were writing Gotham Central, and Ed would get really defensive. He would be like, draw it. And I was like, but why? Did you see that? And Michael pointed out correctly, he's like, look, you write this thing in a week. I spend 30 days on it. So there's nobody in the process of a comic who's going to spend more time on it than the artist. Michael lives and breathes everything that's happening in a Lazarus issue. So his ability and his willingness to turn to me and say, I don't know, and to argue a point, and then to, and he has been right and he has been wrong, and to admit when he is, wrong, and to admit when he is right, is a blessing. That's the best kind of partnership. If you read the series, issues 27 and 28 of Lazarus, before we had the break and went into Lazarus Risen.
Yeah, and that's where he...
it's the 2-part Jonas story.
Jonas, yeah.
And I had been waiting to get back to Jonas since the end of Cult.
Yeah, like, what happened to him?
Exactly.
He got thrown off.
And I kept telling Michael, I was like, we gotta get back to this Jonas story. We gotta get back to this Jonas story. And he kept saying...
That one was rough.
Well, and he kept saying, he's like, that's not what... We need to stay with forever. People want more forever.
Yeah.
We need to do forever. I'm like, we have to tell this story.
Yeah.
I need this story told here because it fits into the larger work. It's part of the canvas. And this is the time to do it. And I was like, well, all right. And I wrote the first issue, and he was like, this is like my favorite issue. And then he did the second part, and he was like, this is my, and we were, again, like I said, we had dinner last night. He was like, those are my favorite issues of the series so far. Yeah. It was like the 2 Jonah issues, the issues that I absolutely didn't want to do.
Yes,
He's like, they're the best issues I've done.
Yeah. And that's why you guys collaborate so well together. It makes complete sense.
No, and on top of all of that, you don't, my manager, my Hollywood manager type, is very fond of telling me, because my desire is to become friends with the people I work with. I want to be friends with the people I'm going to spend that much time with. She's very fond of saying, and now she's, she said this to me several years ago, and I've thrown it back at her so many times, she now regrets having said it. But she says it's called show business, Greg, not show friendship. And she's absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, there is a business there. But if you can be in business with people you like and people you respect, why wouldn't you?
No, absolutely. And do you get to usually pick who you collaborate with when you go into
At this point, yeah.
Okay.
When I was starting out, no. But one of the benefits of doing creator-owned work is that the whole of that team is assembled by the team. So, I write the old guard because I have this idea and got a wild hair and I need to write it. So I write the first issue and I'm like, it's gonna be kind of fun. who would be good to draw it? And I look around and I go, Leo would be a great match for this. Hey, Leo, are you interested? And Leandra says, yes, I'm very interested. I want to do it. And from there, we grow out, right? But I could have conceivably brought that script to Image and said, it's this thing I want to do. I don't know who should draw it. And, Eric Stevenson at Image Comics would have been like, here are some artists that I've been tracking. I think they might be a good fit. Right now, everything I'm doing that's creator-owned are all projects that either arose in direct collaboration with my partner. Let's say Black Magic's a very good example of that. Nicola and I, this is the thing I wanted to do. I had pitched it to her. She had been under exclusive at DC at the time. When she got out of that exclusive and we started, so that's very much a two-hander. Lazarus, I went to Michael and I said, well, I have this idea. It starts like this. And he was like, I want to do that. The Old Guard, I have this idea. What do you think, Leo? I was at Thought Bubble in Leeds last year. I run into Cully Hamner first night of the show. He's in a restaurant. And I see him through the window. And I'm like, oh, I'll go in and sit down. And we start talking about the fact that he is going to be finishing up this exclusive at DC. He'd really like to do something creator-owned. We've been talking about it for a while. Over dinner, we're like, well, let's do this. So where did that idea come from? Was it him or me? It was the dinner table. But he was sitting right there. So, on Lois, Perkins and I had been talking for a long time about wanting to do something together. And actually, we had an idea for a book that was going to be called The Planet, that was going to be about the reporters at the Daily Planet. And then Brian Bendis came on to Superman and said, please, would you do a Lois book? And so DC said, well, we don't want to do The Planet, then do Lois. So, Perkins was part of that from the beginning. I've got sketches of Renee and Lois that he did like 2-3 years ago now that are sort of the design drawings.
Right.
So we always knew if we got the chance to do it, what it would look like.
What it would be going towards. And so going back to something you talked about earlier with like your family and your upbringing, it kind of gave me quite a bit of an open window to why you have such empathy growing up, seeing all the migrant workers and everything. I mean, do you feel like basically like, it's interesting to me because I work with a lot of millennials, I work with a lot of teenagers, and I don't really know if their childhood is like playing into who they become, like it's just like, I don't know what experiences they're having. And, it's interesting to me because for me, my childhood was huge into the person I've become because martial arts and my lifestyle and everything. So for you, do you feel like, seeing what you saw and like listening, hearing and everything your parents
I don't see how we, all we are the sum of our experiences. And if you go back through my books, and I mean through basically everything I've written, the same thematic stuff comes up over and over again. Like and people will come to me and they'll say, yo, you write about this, you write about this. And they're not wrong. There are things that I'm writing about that I don't know I'm writing about, but the thing that I've become aware that I'm most always writing about is I'm writing nature versus nurture stories. What are we brought up to be versus what are we?
Yeah.
And where are those things in conflict, and how do we resolve them, and so on and so forth. So I can't I can't point to any one thing and say this is what makes me the writer I am. I can point to a lot of influences. I can say, look, I grew up in a house where I knew writing was a thing human beings did. My mom had been a journalist. When I was very small, the sound of her touch typing on her electric was, it's one of the sounds of my childhood, is this machine gun rattle of keys and then the occasional ding. My dad was dyslexic. Him often sort of his corner office dictating, a brief was something that I thought that was just a thing people did. And there were always books. You know, everybody in the family read. Everybody in the family read. You know, my older sister has Down syndrome. When you grow up with somebody who is developmentally disabled, I mean, again, I don't want to. The danger is always to overgeneralize. I suspect that gave me a fair amount of empathy.
Yeah, I can empathize. My sister has cerebral palsy, and so you see the world through a different lens.
Yeah.
And their lens.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who manage to not do that.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
To be in their own little
bubble.
bubble.
It's not that everybody
right.
is like, oh, just because you have a sibling or a family member, some selfish people are selfish.
Right, but it does lead you to it.
It does.
And you have to
at least exposure.
Right.
Whether it's
But
how
I would
you
argue
determine.
I would argue also that reading fiction does that. That watching watching good TV or movies should do that. That the success of a story, be it on a small screen or a large screen or between cloth covers, is contingent on empathy, right? On the people creating the work, managing to draw a connection with the people consuming the work. You can't be, I think, an effective artist if you don't have empathy. You just can't.
Well, I don't think you're an effective human if you don't have empathy. Also.
Right,
but I know what you mean,
there's
to
a
have
staggering
to have the results.
Sure, and there's I think a staggering number of people who do fail in this.
Yes, we can name a few, but we won't.
Well, and we're also in this weird era where, again, this goes back to the social media thing. Social media encourages you to not be empathetic.
Right.
It destroys destroys civility, and it breaks the social contract. And one of the things that the social contract is built upon is empathy. When I was in grade school, like first grade, second grade, the first thing that they tell you is the golden rule.
Do unto others
as you would have them do unto you. That's the social contract right there. Treat people as you wish to be treated.
Are they still teaching that rule?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, they certainly don't teach civics anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's, so now we go back into the politics of it. I think that's deliberate.
That's so weird we got back into
politics. Yes, constantly.
Yeah.
But I think it was, a lot of where we are today is the result of many bricks being removed from the edifice of the Republic.
Yeah.
And sometimes being removed with malice aforethought. The fairness doctrine being struck, Reagan getting rid of the fairness doctrine was absolutely malice aforethought, right? You cannot have Fox News with the fairness doctrine. That was deliberate. You no longer have to grant equal time. You no longer have to allow an opposing or dissenting opinion, right? It used to be you had to. You had to do it, right? Now you don't. So that's how you get, the state propaganda network.
Yeah.
And that's how you get Rush Limbaugh. That's how you get all of that. You couldn't have that before.
Right.
That's deliberate. One can argue that, and again, I don't know the malice with which this may have been done, but the erosion of certain education curriculums around the country, right? In some cases very deliberately, in other cases for budget reasons. So we're going to cut these classes because we need to save the money. This is the class we can cut. Now, when you're cutting classes, but then you have a federal standard that says, but you have to do these things, there's no federal standard that says you have to have civics. And that's what you need. You need a federal standard. You need, and think about the insanity of this. If you really think about this. Okay, it makes sense that you need to be able to read at a certain level. It makes sense that you have to have an understanding of mathematics at a certain level. We need a science standard. We need a civic standard. There needs to be a standard of this is what it means to be a citizen of the Republic. These are the rules of the Republic. This is what it means. And it doesn't exist. That's absurd. That's crazy.
And that's why there's such disengagement among the younger generations.
Right, but one wonders if see, and again, this is one of those ones where I go, was that malice or was that negligence? Was it just presumed? Was it just presumed that of course you're going to understand this because you're in it, right? Or was it literally somebody, going, again, easier to make, ignorant people are easier to scare and easier to make angry.
Yeah.
So there is a vested interest in having a populace that is ignorant. In making sure that they don't understand certain things, and disengage from them.
Really hard to find factual, unbiased information. Like you actually have to really seek it out, read several different. No one takes the time to do that, and so they're informed off of the first hint of a
here's
news
the
headline.
First tweet, there it is.
That's it. I'm gonna go with that. And I'm like, I'm always trying to, if there's a big thing going on, I'm like the Kavanaugh thing or something. I'm like, okay, I want to read. I want to understand it before I can even try to form an opinion or speak about it, or I ask questions
and at least find. At least find two different sources.
But that is way too much effort. People aren't going to do that.
Well, and it's not easy. It's also not easy.
It's not easy.
I mean, the effort would be less of an issue if it was more convenient.
Yeah.
But now we're burying it. And we've also convinced people that the tweet is all you need. That's all you need. All the information's there.
And that is why you deleted your account.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you would entertain the thought of a question I have for you. And I know that I know you well enough to be like, no, I'm not going to do it. But you don't have to say yes. But I listened to a podcast with Nancy K. Jemisin on Ezra Klein, and she's an author who builds worlds and fantasy worlds. And she does workshops and stuff on how to build a world. And so on the podcast, I'm listening, and it was so fascinating to hear like this world building. For you, it feels like every other Greg Rucka interview, I know, but we have to bring up the fact, and me being a female reader, interviewer, personage, it feels like I have to bring up being a woman. I have to bring up the fact, and it is one of the reasons that I, of course, kind of kept badgering you to come and talk to me, is that we love how you write female characters, the depth of research that you do, how human and relatable, and just empowered that you write them. Like, and I loved yesterday when I was sitting in your panel and you're like, yeah, I like PI stories. When I was given Hardy Boys, I was like, Nancy Drew, way better stories, way better interesting. So you're like, the writing was on the wall.
No, I mean, I suppose we could have gone back and said, well, that was obvious at the start.
But
yeah, I mean, I'm not. Where's the question?
Yeah, the question is. I also heard you describe yourself as a feminist writer, and that for you, everything is about the character.
Yeah.
That character is what drives you as a writer, and that is where you start. So if you're writing Lois, you ask all of these questions about Lois. And so when I heard the podcast with Jemisin, and they did this story building, I was wondering, like, if we could do kind of that character exercise. So like, for example, if you were going to be like, all right, Mimi Chan is a character, like what are the questions that you ask? Like,
wow, that's an interesting question.
Where do you go? Like, I mean, obviously Lois Lane, everyone kind of knows stuff about her, right? But people don't know who I am, or, or so this is how you create a character based on someone or not based on someone, I guess is the question. I mean, well, I was wondering if you do the exercise, because I just want to know how you write character.
I think the answer lies, this is going to sound maybe a little simplistic. I think the answer lies in discerning what are the truths of the character, and then respecting those truths, right? So if I am if I am creating you as a character in this situation, right?
Okay.
Then we go, okay, so why does Mimi want to, given everything else that she has in her life, given the fact that she has a professional career, given the fact that she has a fulfilling personal life, she has a family life, why does she want to track down people in various stages of, pop culture and politics, and, invest in a not cheap mic and a not cheap video camera and tripod, and go out and interview them? Why is she doing that, right? What is it that what is it that motivates that? And then we go, okay, well, once we answer that, we iterate out, right? So
if I were to answer,
well, so
right.
if it was, okay, well, what she's trying to do is she wants to, empathy is going to be the key word. She wants a greater understanding, right? And she wants to understand herself, and then in educating herself, she wants to share that. All right. So that's a direction, right there.
Right.
Right. That's a motivation. That is a story, because now you're doing that, and okay, now here's your complication. Complication is you want to interview Greg Rucka, but Greg Rucka won't get back to you. Okay. Now you have to deal with all the other things. Oh, here's another complication. You have to teach a class, but that's the only time you can interview this council person. All right. You can get the interview, but it's down in Miami, and it's at 7 tonight. How can you get there? Right. All the story comes out of that. Right? Because the desire is now we know what it is you want, why you want it, how you're going to get there, and then the story becomes, okay, well, what makes it difficult, and what are you willing to do to overcome the obstacle to achieve your goal? And then if we're writing ideally well, what we do is we keep complicating it, so that not only are you going to come out to Portland to interview, oh, Greg finally got back to me, but he says he'll only do the interview in his living room at his home in Portland. All right, now I got to get the money together to go out to Portland. Okay, now I've got to get a hotel room. Now, okay, so, oh, my flight got canceled. Right, this is the only.
I was totally afraid of that, by the way.
Can you reschedule? No,
Right.
he can't. Great. I have 3 days. I've got to get to Portland.
Right. And that's a journey in itself, right?
And then the rental car breaks down. And then the gas station that you're getting the car repaired in is robbed. And
I have to fight my way out of it, obviously, because I do kung fu.
Or they steal your gear, and now you have to get your gear back, and then you get to the wrong house, and so the story extrapolates from there. You look at Lois, and there are certain truths about Lois that come with Lois. One of the truths is the DC universe is her reality.
Right.
Another truth is she's been married to Superman in the comics for a very long time now, and he's Superman, right? So that is its own truth. He is Superman. I have no patience for and no interest in those people who are like, oh, Superman's boring. Nobody with that power would be that good. It's like, that's not a flaw in the character. That's a flaw in the reader. That's a flaw in the audience. If you cannot accept Superman as he is presented, that's you, and I feel sorry for you. I really do. If you cannot accept that idealism and that heroism, and that altruism, if that's so off-putting to you, that says some very sad things about where you are and what you think of the world. We accept Superman as true. So if Superman is true in the context of these stories, if he is everything he says he is, then that means the marriage works, right? I have been married for quite a while now.
Yes.
I'm going to be, I'm closer to 30 years than to 25.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
To make it work has required effort. It has required compromise. There have been stormy days and there have been great days. All right. So, what is the truth? The truth is they are happily married. That means they have stormy days and they have great days. It means they argue. It means they can disagree. So, that's the truth. Lois Lane is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist in the DC universe. She is, we are told repeatedly, one of the greatest investigative reporters in the DC universe. So, those are truths, right? So, all of these things so who is this woman? Who is this woman who you can understand falling in love with Superman? That's easy enough, right? To me, the more interesting question is, why did Superman fall in love with her?
Right.
What was it that literally his first day at the Daily Planet, he saw her and he was like, and and there were birdies and hearts and
flying around.
Seriously, what is it about this woman for a man who literally could meet anybody, right? And arguably knows almost everybody. Lois Lane's the only one. Lois Lane is the woman that he was like, yeah, my heart sings for nobody but you. The answers to those questions, become the foundation of the story. And then once you have that character, for me, once you have that concept of the character, because you can never know everything.
Right.
But you have an aggregate of information, then you start throwing out the ideas of, okay, so what is the story we tell? What are we trying to do in the stories? And stories do different things. The story that we came up with for you, right, is Mimi wants to do these interviews because this is information she wants out in the world. All right? What I'm doing in Lois is not Lois wants this story told. The Lois series is much more, and I've said this several times already, but it's much more a character study. And in particular, it's really a character study and an analysis of what it is to be a journalist. And by definition, if you're writing that in 2019, then you have to be saying, what does it mean to be a journalist in 2019, even if it's in the DCU?
Right.
So the DCU then has to reflect our world enough to make that relevant. And that relevance is obvious because what she is doing is in a world that, with the exception of the superheroes and supervillains and so on, looks pretty much like ours. You could absolutely tell the same story and set it in the Star Wars universe. You absolutely could. You could have a journalist trying to pursue these same things. You could do it in Star Trek. You could do it, in any setting you want. The fact that, again, the DC universe bears this resemblance to our own makes it that much easier to look very topical.
Right. I was curious if there was any, you're obviously very known for, Gotham Central, Lazarus, and Stumptown, of course. And I know you're proud of all of those works, but is there like a project that's maybe a little more overlooked that you kind of go, I really love this one and it didn't take off, or I actually know a lot of comic book store owners and they're like, we want those hidden gems that, writers like you.
Right. It's funny because I actually think arguably some of the best work of my career is Lazarus. And we don't really have a huge readership on that book. It's a testament to the difference between work for hire for like a Marvel or a DC and a creator ownership, that you do at a place like Image or Oni. That we have managed to do Lazarus for, coming on 6-7 years, and the book is surviving. I would love more people to find it.
And see, this shocks me because this is what drew me to you
Yeah.
is Lazarus. So that's why I'm like, what? That's not your number one selling of all time.
The metrics, you know, it's funny because the metrics in comics are very skewed. And especially now that we have all these superhero movies and so on, people think like, oh, you write Wonder Woman, you sell millions. God, no, you don't. Like a good issue of Wonder Woman sells 60,000, right? A good issue of Lazarus hits like 22,000. All right, so that's a third. That's a third.
Yeah.
You know,
and I guess because it's Wonder Woman, right?
Yeah.
So, and they have the backing of.
But even if you think
that's
if you
compared to the movie.
if there were 60,000 people, exactly, 60,000 people went to see the Wonder Woman movie, that's an unmitigated flop.
Yeah, and there would be no second Wonder Woman movie.
that would bankrupt the studio.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that would be car crash bad. So it's the thing about comics is that it's very easy to be a big fish in the comics pool because the comics pool is really small and shallow, especially in the U.S. In the U.S., the comics pool is driven by superhero comics. And a lot of people, and I've seen it, a lot of creators mistake success in that pool for success on a much broader stage. I signed more copies of the first Stumptown trade this weekend than I ever have since the thing came out. Like the numbers I signed this weekend, just this weekend, probably 2 times, 3 times as many as I had ever signed in the 10 years prior. Okay? That's the difference of that exposure, right? So, you know, I think Michael and I are doing the work of our career on Lazarus. I'm really fortunate in that a lot of what I've done, I've been able to do. You know, I've simply been privileged enough to do it. There are more works that I feel I didn't quite land the plane, despite my best efforts, than ones where I did. You know, I did a series for Dark Horse a couple years ago called Veil. It was drawn by Tony Fajula, and I was writing out of a idea I'd had for a really long time, and it was very much a thematic rather than a character or a plot or story origin. I had an idea I wanted to extrapolate, and then the problem was I had to reduce that into an actual story, and then in the story I had to actually come up with the plot around it. And you know, I'm not sure how well it did. People read it. I sign a few of them. You know, every show I go to. I know that when I finished the last issue, I was like, I didn't execute. It did not execute, and it may have been the idea was just beyond me to execute. Like I didn't have the skill. I still don't know why. Right? It may have been that it was that the idea itself needed more room, and it may have been that, you know, it was this thematic issue that I wanted to address, and that really can't sustain a story. That the thematic needs to evolve out of the story, and in some cases. Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing in writing. There are no universals. What doesn't work this time may work next time. Yeah. The approach this time may not work next time. So I look at that one and I have a very strange relationship. That's one of the stories that I'm always a little like, I'm not sure about that. It's hard, you know. I actually, the problem is there's 20 years worth of comics now.
Yeah, I mean, and novels too, right?
Yeah.
So,
though my career as a novelist was always a very strange one. And I do use past tense because I'm just not writing novels these days. The last novel I wrote was an incredibly unpleasant experience. Not the novel itself, but everything around its release. The publisher mishandled it horribly, and then turned around and told me, well, it didn't sell, so you have to try something else this time. And it's like, it's not my fault. I gave you one of the best novels I ever gave you. And by the way, my dad just died. So, hitting me with this, not the best time. So I haven't, I've got novel ideas, but I've been leery about going back into prose.
Do you find one harder than the other, or is it just where
I
you're
find
at the time?
prose much harder.
Much harder.
Prose is much harder because one of the things I love about comics, and I think one of the reasons why the door opened, because I started as a novelist. When I got into comics, one of the things that was so delightful was that I was working with other people. When you're writing a novel, you're not. When you're writing a novel, you're entirely alone. And while I like, my solitude every so often, I can't live like that.
Right.
I want to be able to engage with others.
And bounce the ideas like you
exactly.
and Michael.
I want a collaborator. And that's the thing, in particular about creator ownership, right? None of these are mine. They're ours. The old guard is Leo and me, and Daniela, and, Jody, and Eric, and Alejandro, everybody who makes that book, Black Magic is Nicola, and it goes on. Lazarus is, and there's and you see this a lot in press around comics. They really quickly will say, Greg Rucka's Lazarus, and they'll just ignore the fact that Michael exists. And that's a problem just in the reporting of all comics.
Yeah.
That they always put the writer up there and they forget that this thing doesn't exist if it isn't drawn.
It'd be hard to turn the pages.
I can have the greatest ideas in the world, but if Michael ain't there to go, okay, yeah, but how do we actually do that? We're dead in the water. So yeah, it's weird. I'm going to be 50 at the end of November. We've been fond of saying in this house for the last year, it only took 25 years to become an overnight success. We are in a big year.
Yeah.
We're on the cusp of some really huge things. But even, again, going to that Lazarus example, none of this happens in a vacuum. Everybody in my family is responsible for where we are now.
Absolutely.
And and I'm sure my kids don't see how. I'm sure they're like, oh no, that's Dad's doing that thing. They don't see how they've made it possible. And they don't see what they've contributed. But it's a collective effort. So.
Right. And will you say that just because of the support or the
inspiration?
inspiration?
All of it. And the inspiration has come in all sorts of ways. And everything from research help to, ideas to insight to their willingness to do without me for, 3, 4, 5 days, weeks, months at a time. The biggest problem with writing a novel for me is that when I am in a novel, I am even more than, because every writer is writing all the time, right? There's always stuff percolating in the back of my head. I've got a Lazarus script I'm working on, and there are things bubbling around.
Right.
I've got an old guard script I'm working on. It's the same thing. All of these things are happening, but they don't interfere on the day-to-day the way a novel does. A novel consumes in a way that is, for me, incredibly draining and incredibly exhausting and very isolating, where, I come out after a 3,000-word day and it just, it never is silent. So if I was in the middle of a novel right now, literally half of my thought process would be on how do I solve the problem that I have in front of me, or where am I going, or whatnot, to such an extent that I would check out of the conversation. You know, there were times when I would be writing a novel where Jen and I would be standing in the kitchen, you know, after, you know, 7, 8 in the evening, and talking about what has to happen the next morning. You know, okay, well, Daphne's got, you know, a doctor's appointment, and Elliot's got to be over here, and so on. And in the middle of all that, I would say, you know what I need to do? You know, when Atticus gets to Hoboken, what he's got to do is he's got to go down to Frank Sinatra Park. That's where I've got to set it. And Jen would look at me and be like, did you hear a thing I said? And I would say, yeah, Dashiell's got a doctor's appointment, and Elliot's got So but it's that sense of being in two worlds.
Yeah, and it's draining.
It is, and I'm not sure it's an issue of effort to return. I'm not sure if it's that I'm better at comics than I am at prose. Because I don't know how good I am at prose. I know how good I'm not, right? I can read people and be like, holy mackerel, I wish I could do that.
Such as?
I have, well, I've got a long list. Terry Pratchett right now is one of the biggest regrets I have discovered in my life is that I must have been in the same place as Sir Terry on multiple occasions.
Oh.
And, you know, the same shows or whatnot, and I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I will regret to my last day that I could not go to this man and say thank you. Tim O'Brien on the other end of the spectrum. I love the way he writes. Cynthia Ozick, Joyce Carol Oates. I mean, Stephen Crane. I've got a long list. There are people that I can imitate, and I have my own style. You know, I have a clear voice. But, and I don't know if it's, I honestly don't know if it's also an issue of perceived success, right? I am, in my better moments, I am capable of going, yeah, by any metric, you've been successful in comics. It's much harder for me to say that about novels, because that success is oddly more commercially driven than critically. And while there has been a fair amount of critical acclaim for my novels, none of them really, nobody was lining up at bookstores to get them at midnight. And like I said, this last experience, the last novel, Bravo, and I've written some, like, quote unquote, what they call middle reader books since then, you know, in the Star Wars universe, because the editor on those was an editor I knew back at DC, and he asked, and it's Star Wars, so how do you say no?
Yes.
But Bravo was just a brutal experience, because it really was, I think, probably the best piece of prose I'd ever written. And the publisher pretty much utterly betrayed me on it.
I see.
And then...
And that's the follow-up to Alpha.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, because I've gone through Alpha. I haven't got to Bravo yet.
Yeah. Well, you make sure you leave with one today. But, and Bravo's a very different book than Alpha.
Yeah.
But I'm very, very proud of that book. And like I said, the publisher really, really, really failed me.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating thing for creators. It's like you can't just create and be like, look, everyone, here it is. You know, because I spoke with a lot of editors, and they would say, man, we would go to bat for these projects that we were so passionate about. And then they would just get shut down. And they were like, and there was nothing we could do.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, it's okay, Kickstarter, or you know,
and then
what do you do?
Find another metric.
And then what do you do? I mean, are there comic projects like that for you now, or do you just go to Oni and be like, I'm Greg Rucka?
No, I'm pretty fortunate right now, and even if nothing that I do in comics is going to be a financial, you know, triumph, almost anything I do is guaranteed to earn out. There will at least eventually be a modest profit to be found. Image knows that from me. Oni knows that from me, that they're going to be able to cover their costs. And then everybody, because every publisher hopes, and then, maybe this will be the thing that catches fire.
Yeah, yeah.
And who knows, it might.
Right.
But it's much more difficult with a novel. And the novel market has also changed radically. To get signed now, it is so driven by publicity and marketing. It's like, well, the book may be the greatest thing in the world. Are they good on camera? Do they look good? Will we be able to put them on tour? And it's like, seriously, these are the questions? So with Bravo, like I said, the publisher failed me horribly. And then my father passed away, like almost immediately on its release.
And I know you guys had a really strong relationship.
Yeah,
you're a very family above all. You're a very family-oriented.
He was my hero.
Yeah.
It's funny, when we started Lazarus, and family above all was meant to be this very sinister refrain.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then Hissy Fittler moves into the White House with his brood, and boy, does family above all become this very toxic statement.
Yes.
And then I have a dear friend who lives in New York, Oz Donald. And one of the Lazarus shirts, there's there's the Forever Rondell shirt, and on the back, on the new ones, it says "Family Above All."
Okay.
And there's also a Sequoia security shirt that I believe also says that on the back.
Okay.
And Oz was, I guess, in Midtown somewhere, and he was wearing that shirt, and it was after, yet another round of locking people up in camps. And apparently people were like, yeah, absolutely. Like, it has gone from being this, what I knew to be this very sinister thing.
Right.
To becoming this overtly sinister thing, to now becoming a rather subversive resistance thing, which I think is kind of lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like the the acting exercise where it's one phrase and you say it every way, and it just depends on the tone. It depends on the context. It depends
how sinister can you make
it?
How funny can you make it?
That has come up so much in the last few weeks for me. It's so strange, but yeah, it's funny because at first you're like, oh, family above all, because they're so dark. These families in Lazarus, and I'm just basically
only about serving
them. But then the relationship even between Forever and Johanna, it's just like, what? Because at first you just hate, you want her to just be off right away, like she shouldn't be in any more issues. And then all of a sudden there's just this switch, and you're like, what's happening, and how you feel towards the characters changes. And
Michael still doesn't trust her.
Yeah. Well, I still don't trust her either. Okay, because I'm very untrusting. It takes a long time for me to get over stuff. But I trust you guys. So I'm hoping. But yeah, it's so funny that you still say, and I do. I feel like it's such a special project, and I'm no critic of comics or have anything but my own opinion, but I am on a mission to just encourage every person I run into to read it. And so it surprises me it doesn't do better in quote unquote sales, but that is like,
well, but it's also, there are a number of reasons, right? Well, and there are a number of reasons. I mean, the market makes it difficult, right? Because there are comic book stores out there that just, if it's not Marvel and it's not DC, they don't carry it.
Yeah.
Literally, you can't get it from them. They won't even order it. And, it's also not easy. That's the other thing about Lazarus. It's not an easy book. There's a young woman who was at this show this weekend named Diane, who I have known now for, I want to say, a good 5-6 years. And she is in particular a fan of Renee Montoya, but is willing to give just about anything I write a try, right? And I guess tried Lazarus when it first came out and couldn't get into it. And Michael spent a good half an hour being like, no, you have to try it again.
That's so Michael. I don't even know him that well, but I can see this.
But it was funny because when she was saying I couldn't get into it, and I was like, yeah, I can actually see why. I mean, it can be. It's a very off-putting start. That first issue is so dark.
Yeah.
It is such a dark first issue.
But I loved it.
Yeah. Well, and for some people, they're like, give me more.
Yes, and you're like, well, okay.
And there are other people who are like, and also I think if you don't know me, right, and you don't know Michael, the first 5-6 pages of that book actually look pretty misogynistic.
Okay.
Like there is a way to look at that and be like, that is really sexist.
Okay.
And I know my intent. I know why we made the choices we made. I still think they're the right choices for the start of that story. But there is a lens through which you can look at that beginning and be like, this is an extraordinarily graphic depiction of the murder of a young woman. And even though, big spoiler, even though she gets up, like even though the reveal there is you can't kill her, I absolutely understand looking at that and being like, I'm not sure I want to come along on this ride. And in point of fact, I don't think we have ever actually approached that level of violence again. There's been a lot of implied, when the Jemay shows up in the series, all he is implied, violence to the 10th power. But you don't see. And what you are getting, in that first issue, and like I say, like I understand how somebody could look at that and be like, that's really misogynistic. One of the things that Lazarus is about, and this overrides, this is, when all is said and done, one of the things you will be able to say about the series, regardless of what you want to draw politically about it or what you feel the statements are or so on, it's a story of abuse, and it's a story of surviving abuse. Forever is abused. She is the product of abuse, and it isn't physical. The physical abuse manifests, but it's entirely emotional abuse. It is a toxic relationship. It is the relationship that says, if you love me, you will do this. And that's not love. That never has been, right? And in many ways, it's her journey of learning that that's not what love is. That that's not what it means. That when something is extorted, it cannot be given. Even if you are convinced that you gave it, it was still extorted. So, yeah, I woke up this morning to see a note from Diane saying, "Okay, I'm further, and I think I'm going to be able to make it this time." I was like, "Thank God."
Yeah. No, it's so fascinating that you kind of laid it out that way, because there's on some levels, like, people who know me would be like, oh, you like it because she's a girl with a sword. You're a girl with a sword. And whatnot,
and you know what? Girls with swords are cool.
Yeah, but...
No, period, paragraph. And also, but on that basis alone, girls with swords are cool.
But what's fascinating about what you just shared, and this is public knowledge, I've blogged about it, I've been very open about it, but I'm actually a survivor of child sexual abuse. And so on so many levels, it's like, I don't even think I read that much into it, but I did see that she was just, always having that, abuse and just like getting back up. Right? Like there's the literal sense of she's killed and she gets back up, but also like the bringing her in, the manipulation. And and I think it's just your ability to put so much layers into her, and I think that's why it speaks to me as well. But anyway, everyone go read Lazarus, obviously. This is one of my favorite things.
I'm very proud of it. It's worth your time.
So I am really, I'm learning to be a better reader, and I've been speaking to a lot of people much more scholastically inclined and knowledgeable than I am, and one of the big things that have been coming up a lot in my conversation is rereading. And it's funny because my husband got me into comics, and when I first started comics, it's because I had insomnia. He's like, here, just maybe if you read, you'll, fall asleep or you'll feel better. And then I started to read, and I only wanted to read things that were completed. I was like, what do you mean I have to wait? What, I don't understand. It's like when I tell the kids I teach and stuff, like, did you know I would watch a TV show and I would have to get home at 5 o'clock.
That's right.
And then I would have to wait a whole
week
week to know what happened.
And
their
sometimes
face.
you had to wait 6 weeks.
Yeah, and their faces were like, what? They couldn't even fathom this. And so I was a little bit of that spoiled generation with comics. So I was like, well, I only want to read everything completed. I was reading everything that was just in completion. And he's like, well, you reread them, because when I would buy my comic, I would get home and I'd read it really fast. And then I would go home, and then a day later, I would read it again.
Marlowe,
and then,
Marlowe,
hi.
hold on a second. Yeah, somebody has decided that she wants to be part of this.
Yes.
Come here, you.
She's like, you're not talking
Come
to
on
me
up.
anymore. What happened to
Come
my
on up.
interview?
Puppy up. Puppy up. Yeah, come on. Come on. Good girl. Good girl. So you would get that second read?
Yeah, so basically he would say, I would have to reread the book because there was nothing else to read. I would have to wait until the next trade came out. And he was like, so I would reread it. But he goes, and that's why you make fun of me for being a geek every time we watch anything or there's a story that comes up and I know all the information. Because I'm like, oh, how do you remember everything? He goes, it's not that I remember it. It's that I've reread it so much. But then now I've found so much value in that, not just in comics, but in novels, like going back and rereading. So I'm on this journey with a fitness expert, but he's also, he teaches, he's a professor, and he's really big into the Once and Future King, Sword in the Stone.
Oh, yeah.
And he and I have been dissecting that, and I do podcasts with him, and I'm on my rereads of it, and I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't notice that this one part was so funny. I was laughing out loud, so the art of the reread is something that just keeps coming up. I mean, is there something that you're always...
It's a fantastic book, man.
Oh,
T.H. White, that first one in particular is just brilliant.
Yeah, and actually I tell everyone stop there because it ruined my life after I reread the rest of it.
Well, I mean, but if you read the whole cycle, that's what he's doing. Yeah.
Yes, but it was heart-wrenching. But so is there something for you that you always have that you reread at different stages in your life that means something to you, or that's kind of that concept?
I reread To Kill a Mockingbird fairly regularly.
Okay.
I'll go back, I'll read Holmes, just because it always gives me joy. When Jennifer and I got married, she has always been a mystery fan. In particular of sort of the mid-40s to mid-60s oeuvre, so Perry Mason. And she turned me on to Rex Stout. She turned me on to Nero Wolfe. I'd never read any of the Nero Wolfes growing up. And they are the most comfortable pair of slippers you can imagine. Like if I am feeling terribly blue, I can pick up any Rex Stout Nero Wolfe, and I am happy. I go back and I reread Douglas Adams.
Right.
But I actually re-listen to Douglas Adams more.
Okay.
I go back to the original radio series, the primary, what are referred to as the primary phase and the secondary phase, and I think the secondary phase, in fact, is genius, and that's the one that most people don't know. And it was the one. The story about that is like he did Hitchhikers, he did the first 6, right? Yeah. And it was done originally as a radio series, and he ended it. And it was so successful, the BBC came back and said, do another one. Yeah. And he was like, how do I come? So he did a second one that he ended in a way that could be continued, and they never did the third. But there's a phrase I sometimes use where when I'm writing and you hit a problem in a story, a lot of the time the way I will solve the problem is actually to make the problem the story, instead of trying to dodge it or avoid it. And I refer to it sometimes as story judo, right? You flip it back on itself. And Adams, that's improbability. That's the infinite improbability drive is entirely that. But then what he does with that concept and then how he extrapolates that line of thinking in the Dirk Gently novels is, I think, extraordinary.
Okay.
And there is a piece of me that thinks that if Adams had lived, I have days where I mourn for the books we didn't get.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, these days I don't actually read a lot of fiction for pleasure. I end up reading a lot of nonfiction for research. Behind you over there is a copy of the Testaments. I don't even know when I'm going to get to open it. And then you'll see above it, right? There's America is Better Than This by Senator Jeff Merkley. I want to read that. Merkley's one of our 2 senators. But at the top, right, is this book on the 10 reasons to delete your social media accounts right now.
The arguments for deleting your social media accounts right now.
And then, but it's the updated and revised edition.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I saw that, and I was like, I
gotta
read that.
Yeah,
I gotta read that.
Yeah.
So I say, you can see, it's funny too. You look around and you can see a lot of the books. It's like, what is he? You can get this is why I'm very suspicious when I'm in houses and there are no books. So
they've been Fahrenheit 451 to their house. So.
Well, because I think, especially in this day and age of we want everything in 4 or 5 second bits, the ability to sit down and read and process an idea is a big damn deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a skill we're losing, and it's a skill we need to preserve. So.
Yeah, and so, I was so happy that I got a chance, even though it was briefly, to meet Jen, because I know she's such a big part of your life, but also, I respect her work as well, and she's brilliant. And I was trying to look into it, but have you ever collaborated on a project with her? I know she brainstorms and asks you questions, but and she helped you. But
we did one that was when eBay launched their comics line. Judd Winnick drew a little 8-page thing that Jen and I wrote, and I think that's the only time we actually sat down and worked on anything together.
Okay.
We've talked about it.
Okay.
But we are very different writers.
Yeah.
I am I'm very quick in draft. Like I'm long in assembly. But once the thoughts are there, I'm a real quick typist.
I see. So I had Bill Willingham, and he was like, there's 2 writers. There's the seat of the pants writer, and then there's the hard outliner.
Well, yeah.
Or both, but
I think he's wrong.
Okay.
Because I think that we all tend to be both.
Okay. Yeah, he's
there are times when, the old guard, very seat of the pants.
Okay.
I literally sat down and was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I had finished issue 3 and was on issue 4, was scripting issue 4, and I had to call Alejandro, the editor, on it. And Alejandro Abrana is like my editor now on everything that isn't a DC book. And I love him, and he is fantastic. And I called him up, and I was like, yeah, so I think it's got to be Booker. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, it has to be and he and I it was a fairly brief argument. He was like, wait, and I was like, no, and it's got to end like this. I didn't know that until I hit issue 4 of 5. Right? Now, Lazarus, I've always known where it's going to go, and I've always had a rough idea of how I'm going to get there. Some issues are very tightly outlined. Other issues, I don't have to write a word down in a notebook because I can sit down and it'll all come out. Lois has been a combination of both. But the biggest difference between the way I write and the way Jennifer writes is Jen writes like she's making a mosaic. Every piece is placed precisely and with such precision. And of course, the beauty and skill of what she does is that you can't tell. It looks effortless. And it is a bewilderingly amount of effort to get to it. And if for Marlowe.
You want love, I know. You just want to be reminded that you're here.
Yeah, we'll take a break in just a second.
Yes, we're almost there. We're almost there. I'm sorry.
The amount of effort she puts into it to make it look effortless. Like you read Hopeless Savages, and they read like their seat of the pants. I've seen her, she spends hours coming up with the right word for Zero's dialogue, you know, and if for no other reason than just because of the deadlines I'm on, I don't tend to have that luxury. So I'm always working much more quickly.
I mean, 2 writers in the house.
Well, we've talked about it.
Okay.
But, and there's another thing, honestly, at work, which is this. In comics, even today, I am the bigger name, and I never want to put her in a position, and she certainly never wants to be in a position where the comics gate, you know, shitheads are going to say, well, the only reason this was published is because she's married too.
Right, absolutely. So I have a few more things. I know we got to wrap up, but there's 2 things that other than my love for Lazarus and your love for Lazarus and whatnot, but I love the fact that I read about your fight choreography background because, you know, I love, you know, fight choreography, and I worked in the stunt world as well. I did stuff in LA, you know, I did the Hollywood thing for a bit, and so I was really interested in that. And then I know that I've heard you say that a good sword fight is the tempo of the play or the story, and that you really take that so seriously. I want to discuss
a good sword fight is the story in a microcosm. And man, there's nothing like a good sword fight. There's nothing like.
And
a good
I was
sword
excited
fight.
to hear you actually go out into the park and choreograph stuff, and then film it, and then send it to Michael. Is that because he wants that, or is it just because you're like so into it?
Well, it's also, and it's much easier to show the fight than to describe it.
Of course,
right?
Of course.
And then Michael doesn't know the terminology. So if I'm sitting there and saying, you know, it's an overhead to 6, he's going to be like, I don't know what that means, you know. I say it's a rising cross block. He's like, I don't know what that means.
Right. Plus, he's a visual guy, right?
So what we did for the Conclave fight, and we did again for the Sonia Mueller fight, was a friend of mine, Neil Bailey, and I went to Irvington Park with, you know, video camera, and we'd choreograph enough of the fight that I knew I was going to need for the book, and then we would film it. And we would film it at speed, and then we would film it slowly, and try to give Michael at least a master and maybe a different angle, because Michael he draws from reference. And he draws from models, so he has to build these things. For the Sonia Mueller fight, we actually went and Neil went to like True Value and got a whole bunch of PVC pipes because we had to make a Zweihander. So and we needed something that would be big enough to be a Zweihander, which was a stupid choice for Mueller. I had gone with the Zweihander just because he's a size queen, you know, he's just everything about the guy is as big as possible. It's like that's the worst possible weapon for a one-on-one sword fight. I mean, really, Sonia should have been like bat flick, and that should have been it. Really, if I had been honest about his Zweihander, because he would have been like, I'm getting into stance, and she would have been like, and I have just punctured your lungs 8 times. Well, you are getting 80 pounds of sword over your head.
I want to see this footage.
It doesn't tend to look great because a lot of the time it's very much, and it will even be me narrating as we're doing it. So I'm saying like, Neil is Mueller, I am Sonia. Sonia is attacking like this. Or right here, this is where it's going to get caught in the railing.
That's why as soon as I met Michael, the first 2 seconds I talked to him, he goes, oh, you do Kung Fu? Oh, are you going to be doing our sword stuff? I was like, I guess so.
He's not joking. He's not joking, and do not be surprised, because a lot of the time what ends up happening is, and it's gotten harder the bigger the fights get. You know, it's easy if it's a one-on-one. Neil and I will go to the park,
but
right?
Then you have multiple players.
But if I've got a 4-on-1, I have no idea. The fight at the end of Cull.
Oh, Cull.
Yeah, which was okay. I need how many weapons? Well, if when we're done, we go down and I'll show you the office, and you can see the sword bag. You know, where it's like this is just all the prop weapons. But
Well, I have a lot of weapons at home, so I
Oh yeah,
don't need to fabricate
we
any
speak
of them.
sword.
Yeah,
we speak sword.
We're good.
But
But
yeah,
it's funny. I can't wait to talk to him about it on my podcast
I'm
because
dead
that's what I did
serious.
for Mulan. Like I did video reference, and he was like, "Yes, that's how I do it." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's not a lost." Because in animation, it's kind of a lost art. They use motion cap, you know. So, but I was like, "Oh, right," but you can't really do that. You have, you know. So yeah, it was a fun conversation.
Well,
so
and there
I can't wait to
there was one fight where I had people say, "Oh yeah, we'll do it," and then they did just a horrible job. It was one of those ones where I got the reference and I was like, "This is absolutely useless to me," and they didn't do any of the things I asked. So I tend to. I have a feeling it would be very different with you, Mimi, because you know what you're doing.
No.
No, I'm dead serious.
So a lot of the characters that are female that fight, there is differences
There
in
are.
how I would balance my
Exactly,
stance and how I would
and how you're moving
approach,
your weight and
yes,
so on. Absolutely.
And because it's usually a bigger guy that you know you're dealing with, and you would definitely position yourself differently.
Then you will. Well, this is a big spoiler. I've got to come up with a sarong versus sword fight at some point. Okay. So
don't worry.
Be
we
prepared.
Won't spoil anything.
Be prepared for that
yes,
call.
Okay. I will be. I'm like, what? You want me to work with you on Lazarus?
Yeah. Oh God.
My favorite thing ever.
So I'll tell you one of the things, like and I've already made this clear. If we ever get to TV,
yes.
I do not want Game of Thrones fights. Oh. I want the fights to be. I really want them to be as, and I use the word advisedly, realistic as possible. And some of the Game of Thrones stuff, it was like, yeah, that's not how swords work. You know what I mean? And I really want, and one of the other things that I really would love if we can do it, because it will work better on a screen, is I want the cultural differences. They're coming out of different backgrounds.
Yes, that's
they have different fighting styles.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I want to use those.
Yeah.
And the
and
amalgams.
You want to see the pros and cons of each style and how they, fit up against each other.
Because Forever is clearly a hodgepodge of styles.
Yes.
But there's obviously a strong Asian undercurrent there.
Yeah.
Sonia is what do we call it? European? What do they call it these days? There's a shorthand, and I've lost it. It's that European martial arts school.
Yes, and they're in Chicago. There's one in Chicago. Gene Ha was telling me about it, and I can't. But the name's escaping me.
There are a couple salons here in Portland.
Yes.
But it's the long sword fighting and what we now know.
Yes.
Versus what we knew 10, 20 years ago. Yeah. That's very Sonia, Armitage should also be similar, but there are different styles within it. And then, don't even get me started on what we do with Shalani, for instance, or we ever get to meet the Martins Lazarus.
Yes.
We're talking about African styles that really have never been seen in media. The Risen 2 fight with Zeffirino, I was literally throwing all of this capoeira stuff at Michael, being like, it looks like this, it's this kind of move, it looks like this, it's this kind of move. But I love a good sword fight.
Yes.
That was some of the most fun I ever had growing up, was being the guy who died 8 times every Saturday.
That was me.
I was good at it. I was good at it.
You died a noble death. And
I
then
did. Over and over again.
And I just want to, a little bit more about you. I know you like jazz.
Yes.
And I'm a million years ago, that's what I did. I played alto and soprano sax.
Oh yeah,
I played
tenor.
I played of course I did, the Coltrane stuff and Miles Davis. I can't say I have as much of appreciation of just like listening to it. I like to hear it live.
Yeah.
Because it's just, there's something about it. Live, I'm like, take me to a show, but like I don't actually listen all the time, but I know it's something like you really are passionate about.
I actually haven't gotten to do it a whole lot lately. About 2 years ago, for my birthday, Jen and the kids got me a nice record player. And what the camera cannot see is, if we were to flip this around, you would see that we are in the front room, and there's the TV and there's the stereo and so, and you see you see where the wireless hub is? That was where the record player was. So you can imagine how much use it was getting. You needed a footstool to get up to it.
It's at the top.
Exactly. So I finally moved that, and I got a set of speakers now in my office, so I can actually listen to records again. And I've actually discovered a benefit, not just being able to listen to them. You only get like 20 to 30 minutes aside. So you have to get up.
Get up and flip.
Exactly, you have to get up and
get
flip.
the little,
and that means you're not sitting there
dust thing.
the whole time.
Yes.
And it's
Which
a
is
good
what you
reminder to
need to
get
be
up and
doing.
stretch. Exactly. So there is an added benefit. But you know, I grew up, my brother's godparents, who were college friends of my parents, the husband of the couple is an attorney named Harvey Mittler, and he is like the jazz guy, right? And when I was growing up, he would send pop cassettes, and jazz fans, you know, like when you make a mixtape or whatnot, way back in the day.
Mixtape, by the way, are
these
these
were
things
cassettes.
that were like this, and you put it, yeah.
But you would write on the label
Yes.
like what the tracks were, and if you were really like anal about it, you would also write the band. The
And
jazz,
on the cover.
yeah, and you would make the cover and so on. Jazz guys will not only write like this is the album, they'll write every track, they'll write the duration of the track, they will write. They will literally record everything that is on the album. It's like who plays what, where it was recorded, when, who the studio engineer was, everything. So we would get these cassettes from Harvey, and Pop would listen to them a few times, and then I'd steal them and play them in my room. And I came to jazz kind of sideways because I grew up when ABC cartoons Saturday morning had Schoolhouse Rock.
Yes.
And Schoolhouse Rock was done by a bunch of these very, very accomplished jazz people. Blossom Dearie, Bobby Doro, Dave Frischberg. So when I discovered that, wait a minute, they made other records, I got in actually a lot on the vocal stuff and a lot of the jazz songs, and then sort of worked backwards. You know, starting with Miles and forward. But yeah, I am a Coltrane fan like nobody's business.
Okay. Well, being
I
a sax
love
player,
Coltrane,
I mean, it's
and
kind of...
actually Thelonious Monk.
Okay,
I
yeah.
love Monk. I love Monk so much. I can't even begin to describe it.
Do you listen to music when you work, or
I
does
do
it sound like you get
sometimes.
Up and...
It depends. If you know, and the problem is the last 3 months I've been traveling so much, I haven't been in my office much. And hopefully by mid-October things will settle down, and I'll be able to spend a couple months at home, and it will be back to sit down and put on music and work. I used to, when I was in college, I could work the lyrics. You know, I could put on whatever, and I could focus past it. And I can't do that anymore. Now I need to, I need non-invasive. I need something that's supportive. So it tends to be jazz, and it tends to be non-vocal. Because the worst thing in the world is I'm sitting there trying to figure out a line of dialogue, and then somebody is saying, you know, shaboom bop, and I'm like, could you stop that? I'm working. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. And obviously, you know, I'm here at your house, but this is clearly a home, and it's clearly like inhabited by family.
You're in the home.
Yes. And so other than the love of your family, and I know that the kids keep you quite busy, and their, you know, lives have taken off, and what else do you do to just kind of enjoy?
Oh, that's a really good question. I used to play games, either video games, and like you can see there are two consoles there that never get turned on anymore. There's an Xbox One and a PS4, and I can't remember the last time the PS4 was turned on, and the Xbox One gets turned on frequently just because the cable runs through it. So if I'm watching soccer,
right.
So yeah, I watch a lot of soccer when I can.
Okay.
I used to do a lot of role-playing games, but again, there just hasn't been time the last several years. So now, actually, the way I've sort of addressed that is I'm playing sort of in these play-by-post games with some friends.
Okay.
So the pace is a little easier.
Right. Well, those are so all-consuming, those
Yeah,
RPGs.
I mean, and I've always loved role-playing games. I think, I think they're a great exercise for anybody who wants to tell story. I mean, they are just a wonderful tool for honing narrative skill. And my druthers is to create a character and to try to then discover and get in there. And I'm in a game right now that's much more troop style, where you play this character and then you switch to this and so on. And I'm actually having all sorts of difficulties with it. I'm like, this isn't my character. I don't know what to do. These are deep gaming geek problems, by the way. And then, look, I'm a Timbers fan, so I'll go to the games when I can if I'm in town. I try to actually wrangle my schedule so I am in town for games. This summer has not been kind to me for that.
Yes.
And I read.
Yeah. And, in wrapping up, obviously, everybody knows Stumptown's coming out, all these amazing things are happening.
ABC, Wednesdays, 10 o'clock.
I mean, you can hear that on other podcasts. It's been covered so well on these comic book podcasts about how you feel about the adaptations, how, I got to see the pilot at the Portland, the Rose City yesterday, so that was awesome.
It was good.
Yes. And so, without, having to say it, obviously go watch, go read, go all things Greg Rucka. Thank you so much for your time today and inviting me here. And Marlowe, thank you too for the interview.
She's like, and
are we done? Special appearance. So yeah, thank you so much. Hopefully you will allow me to chat with you again sometime.
Absolutely, I'd love it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.
Ciao.